What if you could just hang a heavy sheet of vinyl, for example, a few inches, maybe 10 centimeters off the wall, and absorb bass that way? I mean, in our home studios, our typical small rooms where space is at a premium, that just sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. And this is week 6 in my bass trap breakdown series, where I explain every single type of bass trap out there, cut through the nonsense, and help you make smart, evidence-based decisions about your acoustic treatment. Now, this series is accompanied by my complete guide to bass traps and bass trapping, which you can download completely for free at the link in the description. Everything I'm covering in this series, from foam wedges to tuned resonators, is neatly organized in there for you to reference at any time. So how to identify them and potential causes of confusion, how and when to use them, how many you would need, and the pros and cons of each. So again, if you want to dive deeper into any of the designs that I'm covering in this series, make sure you download the complete guide to bass traps and bass trapping at the link in the description. So last week I covered Helmholtz resonators. If you want to check that out, link in the card right now. But this week we're talking about a design that pops up every once in a while, in particular on Sound magazine's website. And it's a particularly interesting design because it's so shallow. And the basics is that you hang some sort of heavy sheet, usually some sort of mass-loaded vinyl, a few inches, a few centimeters off the wall, inside a frame. And the idea is that sound energy hits this barrier mat, this mass-loaded vinyl, which then starts moving sympathetically with the sound and absorbs it that way. Now, it sounds plausible, but does it actually work? So the first time I've come across this is from a Sound article back from March 2006. I'll link that in the description as well. And it goes through this particular type of bass absorber meant for this vocal booth. The whole construction is only 6 inches, 15, 16 centimeters deep. So it's very shallow considering what it promises to do. So what we can see here is the wall is on our left. We've got a slab of rock wool right on the wall. Then we've got some carpet felt underlay, both behind and in front of a sheet of heavy vinyl, mass-loaded vinyl, some type of barrier mat. And the important thing to note is that this entire construction is only mounted at the top. It's free hanging. And that's what makes this design so confusing, because it basically uses the same materials as a membrane bass absorber, with a heavy sheet in the front on top of some sort of cavity, a box with some insulation material inside it. But it's missing one crucial thing. So in the article, it claims that the key point here is that the felt and barrier mat are left to hang freely within the panel and can thus move slightly to absorb low frequency energy. So the implication is that sound pressure hits this mat and puts it in motion, and that movement is what extracts energy. And it sounds logical. This heavy thing moves and the energy gets used up. But here's why this doesn't actually absorb any bass. And the main thing is the air cavity. So we covered this in week 4 on membrane absorbers, right? So the heavy sheet of vinyl, the membrane, is mounted on an enclosed cavity, and the vinyl basically acts as a mass which moves on top of the air inside the seal cavity, the spring. So it's this mechanism that allows the system to go into resonance. And it's that resonance that determines the frequency at which sound is absorbed. And that's where the energy extraction actually happens. But this free hanging design doesn't have a sealed air cavity. And without that, there is no spring, there is no resonance. And so the mechanism for bass absorption is actually missing. So what the barrier mat actually does when sound hits it is that the inertia in the mat actually resists acceleration. So some of the energy in the sound wave is spent on putting this barrier into motion, but only a tiny amount. And then the internal damping in that sheet actually converts a tiny fraction of that movement into heat. But without the air spring, we only get a negligible amount of energy extraction from that sound wave. So essentially, the vinyl acts as a sound barrier and not as a sound absorber. It basically blocks sound from passing through the barrier instead of absorbing, aka turning a substantial amount of that energy in that sound wave into heat. So a free hanging sheet like this actually blocks transmission. It doesn't absorb any low frequency energy from the room. Now, I want to be clear at this point. For me, Sound on Sound magazine is possibly the best magazine on professional audio out there. I love reading it. I've been reading it for 20 years, and I'm not giving any blame for them to basically propose a not really functional bass absorber in this article. There is another article as well where they actually talked about this. And this is from June 2020, Hugh Robjohn's revamped home studio. Again, I'm going to put that in the description as well. And there's a similar approach in there, although this one is across a corner, and we actually have a good 15 centimeters of Owens Corning 703 in front of the barrier mat, as well as the actual corner filled with insulation material as well. But the principle is the same. It's a loose hanging barrier that is suspended in front of rock wool or insulation material. But in this case, because there is such a substantial amount of the insulation material in front of the barrier mat as well, I don't count this as a pure limp mass hanger bass absorber, if you will, where the absorption comes purely from the sympathetic vibration of the sheet when sound hits it. But yeah, again, no disrespect to Sound on Sound at all. I think there's a bit of a missed opportunity in especially this article from 2020 on actually including some measurements to see just how much of an improvement the barrier mat contributes to the overall design. But this is a confusing topic, and I totally understand that there's some experimentation going on. Of course, when I first encountered this, I also experimented with just putting some heavy vinyl across my porous absorbers, on the front of my porous absorbers. But this was a very long time ago, and I very quickly disregarded the concept as non-functional. And so I never pursued it further than that. Unfortunately, there are also almost no other examples out there. There is one particular manufacturer of acoustic panels which claims to have a limp mass part of the design of one of their bass traps. But again, I don't think this particular product works either. Now, I did try and find some sort of data on what this actually does, but I couldn't find anything, not on this particular type of design anyway. So there is no absorption coefficient data, for example, for a free hanging MLV sheet. There is no impedance tube testing data. There is no reverberation chamber testing data. There are no just room EQ wizard before and after examples available anywhere that show that this might actually contribute in any significant way to just having your standard insulation material inside a design like this. And that's really the thing, right? Because what potentially does improve the sound in the room is simply sound being absorbed by the insulation material. Depending on the thickness, it'll be highs, mid-frequencies. In the case of that corner bass trap that I showed you, it might be even lower down, but the low frequency waves simply bend around this barrier because that's what it is, a barrier, and then get absorbed by the insulation material. So it's the porous insulation material layer that is doing all the work. The barrier isn't actually doing anything at all to contribute to low frequency absorption. So how do you use them in your studio? Don't. Basically not for bass absorption, at least. When should you use them? Well, never. Again, especially not for the purpose of bass absorption. How many would you need? Well, of course, none at all. Your money is definitely better spent on proper insulation material, bass traps with the right depth, or very potentially sealed membrane traps like we covered in week 4 of this series. So in terms of pros and cons, well, the only pros potentially are that this can absorb some highs and mids to high frequencies, but again, it's the insulation material that's doing the work, not the barrier mat. In terms of cons, well, we don't have any evidence that this actually works. There are no measurements available. It adds cost and complexity without actually adding any bass absorption. It can be easily confused with sealed cavity membrane traps, but most importantly, it might actually cause false confidence in the treatment of your room because you think that you're doing something to absorb low end when you're not actually doing any of it at all. So here's what I want you to take away. First of all, and most importantly, a sheet of heavy barrier mat or mass-loaded vinyl does not work to absorb low frequencies if you just hang it loosely in front of the wall. The design just lacks the air cavity that you need to get a resonant system going, which is the mechanism to absorb bass. If this type of assembly improves your room, it's not going to be the barrier mat, the mass-loaded vinyl doing the work. It's going to be the insulation material. And you really want to be careful not to confuse sound blocking with sound absorption, right? These mats are made to block sound, but they don't actually have any mechanism to absorb low frequencies. So as always, stick to what works. Porous absorption, the right depth, enough of it, and it's gonna absorb low frequencies. And of course, if you want to help with that, check out my Build a Better Bass Trap course, also linked in the description. If you want to actually fix the low end in your home studio, this is the way to do it. Hundreds of people have built their bass traps following this design. It's a combined bass trap and diffuser to absorb the low end while keeping the high end lively. You get step-by-step construction videos, how to select the right materials in your area, basically everything you need, no guesswork, no voodoo, no wasted money on things that don't work. Now, before I wrap up, next week's video is gonna be a special one because I've spent the past 2 years testing the PSI AVAA C214 active bass absorbers across 10 studios. And next week, we're gonna find out exactly how it works. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. But with that, let's get back to learning to trust our ears and having fun making music in the studio. I'll see you in the next video.